scripture, which we had talked a good bit about, if you'll remember a few weeks ago, whenever we were talking on discipleship, we looked at this scripture in Luke chapter 14 a good bit a little later in there, but we had read through this, but we'll read through some of it this morning, and then over in Luke chapter 18, a few verses over, where Jesus is talking again. But in Luke chapter 14, we'll start in verse 7 and read from there. And he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, when he had marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them, When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee and him come and say to thee, Give this man place. And thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room. And when he had bade thee cometh, that he say to thee, Friend, come up higher, then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit in meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Then said he also to them that bade him, When thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, a recompense be made thee. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. Now, in Luke chapter 18, flip a few verses there, into verse 9, and he spake this parable unto certain which trusteth in themselves that they were righteous, and despised others. Then two men went up into a temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week and give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes into heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to the house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. So in these two scriptures, Jesus is looking at humility in a couple of different ways, and this is a reiterating theme throughout the Bible. Humility is a reiterating theme. God's Word plainly states what God thinks about a proud person. Proverbs chapter 6 and 17 says he hates a proud look. And this carries on in Jeremiah chapter 50. It tells us that God is against those who are proud. And then, of course, in the New Testament, there's multiple verses that say the same thing. First Peter chapter 5 says he resisteth a proud person. And James 4 and 6, he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. So it is only by being humble, or as we even put ourselves in a place for God's blessings, we have to realize sometimes it's quite easy to forget or to be in that place of being proud and forget how much God doesn't like a proud person, how much God does not like somebody who says, I did it myself, how much somebody that says, as the old song says, is I did it my way, and how much God really, really doesn't like that. Jesus told a vast crowd one day that only those that are poor in spirit will inherit God's kingdom. They shall have places of honor. The riches of heaven will belong to them. As James had said, he's only going to give things to those that are humble. That's a prerequisite for being in a place that God can bless them. So, and we realize that not only did Jesus say this is something that he exemplified from the very beginning, from the very first. The one mark of a real Christian is a quiet and humble attitude toward God and others. We cannot honor his name if we lift up ourselves. We can't put him on a pedestal if we lift up ourselves. We can't place him in his rightful place if we don't if we don't put ourselves in our right place as well. Jesus humbled himself to become a man. That ultimate, from the very beginning, that ultimate example of who he was. He was trying to lift his Father. He's trying to put himself in a place of here he comes, and he humbled himself. He makes himself sin for us. And so we certainly have no right to be prideful people. And we're to follow his example. Many in Jesus' time could not believe that he was Messiah because that's not how they saw the Messiah coming. They didn't see the Messiah coming as the lowest of the low. They saw him coming as the highest. Surely our deliverer is going to come out of a king's household. Surely our deliverer is going to come and he's going to take over Israel, and we're going to return to this powerful place that we would be. Certainly the Messiah is going to come in with guns a-blazing, as it were, and take over. And they could not understand that the more important example for him to place was to be in a place of humility and to show that ultimate act of humility, because they didn't realize. We forget in our lifespan as we purposely try to increase ourselves, and as we purposely try to increase what we've done. And this is not a lesson against working hard. This isn't a lesson against trying to do better for yourself, as we would say it in the South. This is not a lesson against that, but this is a lesson on remembering that this is only one way that we can do that. There's only one way that I can have any prosperity. There's only one way that I can have anything good. It all comes from above. It all comes from the Father. It all comes from him. Any goodness that I have, anything in my life that I have that I would consider a blessing, anything in my life that I would consider, oh look, I've done a little bit. I realize that comes from the Father. It's not done on anything that I've done. It's not anything that I can do. I don't want to be like the rich man that says, oh, look what I've done. I'm going to pull down my barns and build bigger barns. And at no point in his diatribe does he put God in the place to say, oh, look at the blessings that God's given me. And that's the difference of when we live our life, of when we put ourselves in the place of this is what I've done, and this is where I've at, and this is what I've accomplished. And there's nothing wrong with accomplishments. It's just when we put the accomplishments on us instead of putting the accomplishments on him. And we say that we're putting ourselves up and we want to do it. Now, this is a very interesting scripture that we looked at here in the first in Luke chapter 14, and going back to this, and we talked about it several weeks ago when we were talking about discipleship. So we're in this place, and the scene is this is a large gathering, and it came to pass, and if you go look at verse 14 and 1, and it came to pass as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day, that they watched him. So there's a bit of a setup as we talked at that time. There's a bit of a setup of where we are here, and Jesus is brought into this house as one of the guests of honor, and the disciples are brought in to the guest of honor. So this is a house of some certain size because we're told that we're in one of the chief Pharisees' house. So we're in one of the leaders of the town's house. We're in one of the leaders of the city's house, one of the chief Pharisees, and it's on a Sabbath day. So there's this production that has occurred, and there's all this that had happened, and we bring forth this meal, and all this is brought forward, and this is a house that the whole house had been turned into sitting arrangements, and much like when we are on the large family gatherings, when we're there at family reunion, you've got the big table and the main table, and then you got a little side table, and the distant cousins are over there, and the kids are over here at a table, and they had that very similar setup as it was. And as growing up as a kid, you just wanted to get out of the kids table and go to the grown-up table. Then you get to the grown-up table, realize the kids table was much more fun, and maybe you want to go back there. But here we are in this place, in this setting, that we were here, that everybody wanted to be at the grown-up table. Everybody wants to be at the main table. There's some side tables, but it's the main table with all the action happens. It's the main table with all the important people are sitting. And so they're sitting in this place, and In Jesus' time, you had these couches, and they would kind of sit and partially lay on the couch and lean on their left elbow, and you ate with your right hand, because in that culture, that was the hand that you eat with. And so you're leaning, and you would stay at this table, and these dinners would last much longer than typically ours were. And so this is this really long dinner, and you'd sit and talk, and all this stuff would happen, and all the action would happen there. And in the middle of all this, they've brought him, there's this man, a certain man which has dropsy, and so he is here, and they're trying to see if Jesus is going to heal him. But of course Jesus does perform a miracle here, and so this man is this swollen man that's short of breath, that can barely breathe, and they bring this to Jesus, and Jesus performs one of the 5 miracles that he does on the Sabbath day, of miracles of healing, and he just absolutely changes who he is, and he's talking to them. So this is what's happened. You have the house that everybody's came and getting situated, and that's quite a to-do about where you're going to sit and where you're going to go. And in the middle of all this is where the story picks up of our reading here. So because you wanted to sit in this certain place, if you wanted to sit here, you wanted to be at this certain table, and you didn't want to be at this table, and in a monarchy type sitting, that's called the king's table. You wanted to be at the big table at the head of the room. You wanted to be at the king's table, and then there was tables of descending importance. And so you'd sit here at the main table, and then there was other smaller tables or other tables of descending importance. And the further you got away from the head of the big table, the less important that you were. And so they would fancy themselves important because of the clique that they were in. And we talked about last week about how all those things are fleeting and how all those things are temporary. But yet here they are placing such emphasis on these. And it didn't matter who they were. It didn't matter what it was. There's a story that's told from historical writings of a banquet that happens by one of the kings who ruled over Jerusalem in a time frame before Jesus, less than a century before Jesus. There's a story, so very similar setting that's happened here. So the king here is having a feast, and in spite of all the presence of the high-ranking foreign dignitaries, one of the rabbi forced his way to a spot between the king and the queen. And when he is rebuked, he defends himself with a quote saying, "Exalt wisdom, and she shall make thee sit among princes." So in this story, and looking at this historical, it didn't matter that they were supposed to be religious people. This matter of pride had got in. So Jesus, and it's interesting in the story when we look here in verse 7 where we picked up the reading, and it says in the reading, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms. So Jesus is sit, and he's watched as being brought into this table, and he watched the mad scramble of those trying to get to the chief table, and who got pushed aside and who got set in that place, and he's watched all that happen. So this was this mutual watching. We see in verse 1 that they were watching Jesus to see if he was going to heal the man with the dropsy, but Jesus is watching a bit of a chaos that's going on around them. And so they watched him, and he's watched them, and they're showing what they value, and he shows what he values. He tells them that they're trying to see if he's going to violate the Sabbath rules. Is he going to heal this man? And they've put themselves in these positions of power, and they've tried to establish their dominance, and the fact that I'm higher than you on the social hierarchy, and the fact that I'm higher than you on all of this, and they've established all this, and now we've sit down, and everybody sit down and settled, and Jesus begins to show the things that he values versus what they value. And he shows that they may value things, they may value circumstances, they may value with their pride on what they've done and their accomplishments. And Jesus says, I value people. He looks at the man with the dropsy and says, I'll heal him even though it's the Sabbath day, even though it's going to make you upset. But he's a person. He says, you, in the scripture, he says, you'd go pull an ox out of a ditch. Why can't I heal this person? Because you value the things, these physical things. Jesus says, I value souls. And so they had to hold their peace, and he heals them. And this conversation continues, and someone asks, and so he marks them, and he looks, And he quietens there with his healing. He quietens with his absolute authority in what he says there, that says, hey, look, he says we can't work, but we can rescue the perishing. On the Sabbath day, we're supposed to rest, but this man needs rescue, and I'm going to rescue him. They trusted in their own self-importance, but they looked down on others who are not part of their select group and of their select clique. But Jesus reaches out beyond that and heals the one in need. In his question, he silenced them, for they could not verbally disprove of him healing the man without condemning themselves. And then again, here he is, he's looking, and he begins to say, when thou art bidden of any man, don't sit down in the highest room. He says, I've looked around and I've seen all this happen, and I've seen all of this. So Jesus had just witnessed this behavior. Jesus had just witnessed all this that happened. Jesus had just witnessed all this for all those that are known better, and begins to talk, and he begins to say these words that when you're bidden at a wedding, and let him come and say to thee, you're supposed to sit up here, not back there where you're at. He said, don't put yourself in a place where you as the old saying, check yourself before you wreck yourself, because what's going to happen is you're going to put yourself in a place, and then you're going to be embarrassed, and the leader of the feast is going to come and say, well, why are you sitting up here? You belong down there. Jesus says it's much better for you not to think so much of yourself. And this isn't a false humility, and I think part of this in this lesson that we have to understand is this isn't this isn't a false humility, but in Proverbs, as Jesus begins to say this, you realize that he's talking to the Pharisees, he's talking to the scribes, he's talking to those that know the scriptures. And so just as in our mind, these things begin to roll over as Jesus is saying this, surely they begin to hear Proverbs 16, that pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And in Proverbs 25, he says, put not forth thyself in the presence of a king, and stand not in the place of great men, for better it is that he said unto thee, come up thither, than thou shouldest be put in the lower presence of a priest whom thine eyes have seen. Jesus is just reiterating what they had been taught in Proverbs. Jesus says, I see this happening. You're forgetting how you're supposed to act. You're forgetting how even the ancient Proverbs that Solomon writes out teaches his son, as he's teaching those, that this is how you're supposed to be, that this is how you're supposed to act. You put yourself in a place that you can't be blessed. You put yourself in a place that you can't be helped. You put yourself in a place that you can't, you want to put all this importance on yourself. Surely you would understand from a carnal aspect that it's better to be brought up and brought forward. But surely that we have to understand that there's in all things a spiritual aspect to this, that we must be careful, as I was saying before, that if we put all the emphasis on ourselves, and if we put all the emphasis on what we've done, if we put all the emphasis on all the things that I've gathered, if I gather all this up and I say, well, look what I've done, and look how all this that I've done, that we put ourselves in a place that Christ and God can't bless us. If we say that, look at all this that I've done, then, well, I have to turn off the blessing spout, because if you think that you're doing all this, God will say, then perhaps you need to learn that you're not the one doing all this. Help me not to be in a place that I haven't humbled myself, that he can't take care of me. Help me not to be in a place that I can't be in a place, I can't approach him in a way that he says, I can't help you because you don't see yourself in need. You don't see yourself as destitute. You don't see yourself in need of help. You think that you're doing this all yourself. We must prepare ourselves to approach the throne. And as I read through this, there's one of the things that really stuck out to me as I was studying this. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6 says, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. How can I cast my care upon him when I find that I am not humble? How can I say I need help when I feel like I can do it all by myself? Ever pulled over beside the road to see somebody broke down? Now it's a brave new world that we're in. Sometimes I slow down to make sure they got a cell phone and they're making phone calls and that they've got help on the way. But you ever stop to help somebody? No, I got it. Well, obviously you don't got it because you're in a ditch and you're going to have to get yourself out of the ditch by yourself. And I'm trying to help. But guess what, buddy? If you think you got it, have a nice day. I'm happy to help, but I am not going to help you if you say that you got it, if you think that you can do it all on your own. I'm happy to be here. I'm offering help, but you run across those people over here, let me help you. No, I got it. Okay, we'll get it. I'm not here to help, but if you don't put yourself in a position that you feel like you need help, then help will not arise. I don't know why the Lord doesn't help me. Well, it's because you have asked for help and you keep telling him that you got it and you don't need his help. So he's going to say, okay, get it. So when we cast our care upon him, for he careth for you, we have to remember the first part of that is humble yourselves. Realize that I'm in a place that I need help and I need to be pulled up higher. I'm not above where you're at. I'm below where you're at. James chapter 4 and 2 says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he shall lift you up. For him to lift me up, I have to realize that he's higher than where I'm at. For him to pull me to where he is, I have to realize that I'm below him. Now verse 4 and 16 of Hebrews says, let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace and help to help in time of need. Now I'm supposed to come boldly. I'm supposed to. No, you're still humble. We realize that I'm coming to the throne of grace. It's not anything that I've done. This isn't coming to the throne of my good works and all the things that I've stacked up, and the throne of heaven sits upon all the good things that I've done, and the throne of heaven sits upon all the goodness that I've been able to accomplish, and my litany of all the things that I've done, and all the sermons that I've preached, and all the messages that I've done, and all the places that I've done. The throne in heaven doesn't sit upon any of that, and the fact that you grew up in church and chewed on benches all over South Alabama and all the other stuff that the throne of grace sits not on that. This is a throne of grace. This isn't a throne of my works. This isn't a throne that I deserve. This isn't a throne of me getting what I should have. Because certainly if I got what I deserved, it wouldn't be grace. So when I come boldly to the throne, it has nothing to do with me coming bold in my own self, but I become bold realizing that he loves me and that he cares for me and that he wants what's best for me. And I've put myself in a place of needing assistance. I've put myself in a place that when I can cast all my care upon him, he cares for me. When I put myself in a place that I'm reaching up to him, that he's reaching down to me. When I'm reaching out for help, he's reaching to me. If you've ever been in a place that you have ever had the severe unfortunate to happen to you of the boat that you drive was not as good as a boat that you wanted it to be, and you break down on the water, that's an awful difficult place to break down on. You break down on the water because it's real hard to walk home from there when you're out on the lake, and that paddle doesn't work really as well as it does it. And I don't have enough Native American in me to paddle really good, and that pontoon boat don't paddle really well, as heavy as it is, and so you really don't want to break down on the water, and you put yourself in, hey, buddy over there with a working motor, don't know who you are, but we're fast friends now. If you'll help me out, I mean, you don't care who it is. It could be the game warden. You'll take help from the game warden. You'll take help from a guy that you don't know. A community of friends out there on boats, especially if you're the one with a broke down boat. Everybody's your friend. Anybody that can pull you to shore. But the situation goes is the guy on the boat that works, and I've been the puller and I've been the pulley. So unfortunately, I've been on both ends of that equation. But the guy on the boat that works has a rope, and he throws you a rope. Your job is to grab the rope. If you ever put yourself in that situation, he's going to throw the rope to you, and it's your job to grab the rope and fasten it to your boat so he can pull you in. Because if he just throws the rope and you just look at him, then I can tell you about after 3 rope throws that he hits you with the rope and you don't grab it. I'm just going to say, well, have fun paddling home. Because I put myself in a place of needing help, and when that help reaches out toward me, I have to reach back toward that help. I have to put myself in a position of needing help. I have to put myself in a position of saying, hey, can you slow down and at least pull me to shore so I can get help, because I don't like being out here broken down, and I have to put myself in a position of humility of saying, hey, here I am. We bought gas and we crunk it up and we thought it run, but it didn't run as much as I thought it, as I wanted it to. And I've sit here and crunk it till the batteries run down, and it still hadn't crunk up. I've pulled on that cord rope till I've broke a sweat and pulled my shoulder out. I'm going to have some help to get home. You have to put yourself in that place of humility as a guy of saying, here I am broken down. But we have to approach the throne of grace in that same place and saying, here I am broken down. I thought I may have had it. I may have thought that I was in a better shape than what I am, but I'm looking to you for help. But it's only when I put myself in that humility that's when I'm going to get help. If I'm broken down and the guy so gently sees me pulling on the motor and I look frustrated and there's no fishing getting done, he comes by, you need any help? No, I got it. Okay. I'll go back, have fun with it. I got it. You got it. And sometimes when we pull up to the throne of grace, we want to sit there and say, I got it and I don't need your help. But that humility that we have when we have to put ourselves in a place of understanding that He's above us. But such as it is that we should live our life, Jesus is saying that we should live our entire life in that aspect with the realization that my humility is not a false humility. Sure, I've got blessings that I've had in my life and I've blessed more than what I deserve and God's blessed me more than I need, but I realize those are His blessings. I realize that this is all the good things that I have come from Him, and I realize that I'm a nobody, and I don't say that with a false I don't say that with false pretension. I don't say that in a way that I'm expressing a false humility. I just realize where I'm at and where I would be without Him. So Jesus says, when you find yourself in these positions, if you really want to be honored, don't be presumptuous. If you seat yourself at the top, you may find yourself displaced by a superior, and there's no seat left besides down at the bottom. Rather, Jesus says it's better to take yourself a little low and be brought up high. It's better to be elevated than elevate yourself and be brought low. And now Jesus moves beyond this practical advice in verse 11. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Jesus moves beyond this practical advice, as the way to rise high is to begin low, and to the real message that pride seeks honor, but honor rewards humility. Honor is self-sought and self-administered, expresses only one's appreciation for itself. And when you build accolades toward yourself, whenever you build these things up toward yourself, that's not anything permanent. When you reward yourself through reward, that's really no reward at all. And so we'll be reduced. And real honor comes to the man who humbles himself and then is exalted. The Old Testament points out in Proverbs 27, let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. Don't be in a place that you praise yourself. Don't be in a place that you are pushing yourself up. It's better to let others do and say, hey, this is just, again, not a false humility, but the realization that everything that I have is a blessing. Everything that I have comes from Him. And Jesus takes the opportunity here. When we look a couple of verses later, in verse 12, He takes this opportunity not only for the guest that had this hodgepodge mad seating arrangement where they had put themselves in a place, and then He takes a moment to look at the leader of the feast, to the one, and then said He also to him that bade him. So those that had called the feast, and to the chief Pharisee here, He takes the opportunity that says, don't call exclusively just those that can reward you, because that is in a way that you're looking to exalt yourself and looking for those that can return the favor. Well, I'll do this for them because they can return the favor. But here you are, you're supposed to reach beyond that comfort, reach beyond and realize that with the blessings that you have, that you're supposed to take that opportunity to pull somebody up below. Don't always, and this is the opposite end of that coin of being the one that's low and being brought high. When you find yourself in a position, Jesus is teaching here, when you find yourself in a position to bless, when you find yourself in a position to help, take that opportunity to pull those up, not just looking at those that can recompense thee, not looking at those that are lower than thee, and looking at those to say, hey, look, you help me out, you pat my back, and I'll pat yours. And there's certainly something to be said about community and friendships as you help each other out. But Jesus says, reach out and help those that can't help you back. Reach out and pull those up a little bit as you may be sitting a little higher. Take that opportunity to reach out and help those that are below you. That's the other side of the coin of humility, Jesus says this is the other side of the humility coin. Is sometimes you just you'll find yourself in a place to say, "Hey, look here, let me help you. You did a good job. I like the way you did that." When you find yourself as the boss, reach and find that one that says, "Hey," take that opportunity to reach out and say, "Hey, you did a great job there. I like the way that looks. I'm proud of you. I like seeing what that happens." And so Jesus is saying with this opportunity to reach out to those that are below you and use that opportunity to pull them up, to lift them up. And so here we are. But again, we see Jesus saying this over and over. We see Jesus not only saying this, but also doing this. We find that he washes the disciples' feet. We find that in Mark chapter 9 and Matthew chapter 23, we find Jesus not only saying these things, when he's saying, you need to be a servant of all. The greatest of these is the servant of all. Those that would come up, you have to be the servant. You have to find yourself in that servant position. In Mark 9 and 35, he says, "And he sat down and called the 12 and said unto them, If any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and a servant of all. And then he took a child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said unto them, Whosoever shall receive one of the children in my name receiveth me, and whosoever shall receive me receiveth not me, but him that sent me." So Jesus is not only saying these words, but then we see that he washes the disciples' feet, and he over and over reiterates. In Matthew chapter 18, there's a longer passage where Jesus is teaching us to have childlike humility, and he's teaching us that this is how we should be, not in the point of not knowing anything about what's going on, not knowing in a point of being confused and just along for the ride, but having that same approach with the humility in our life that Jesus is saying. And so when we're in that place, the two sides of that coin is to be humble, but also when that opportunity arises is to bring somebody up with you and to help them and to realize that this is where we are, because we see that on both sides. In Mark chapter 8 right there, he says that you must be the servant, but then there's also a time when you take in those that are below you and you bring them up closer to your level. You bring them up with you. And that's the other side of this coin of humility that we must remember. Not only is it keeping ourselves humble, but it's also bringing those along with us. The humility doesn't allow me to lord myself over them. My humble spirit, my meek and quiet spirit, I don't lord myself over those that are below me, but I reach and I pull them up and I encourage them along on the journey as well. Although Luke doesn't mention by name, going back to our scripture here in verse 14, and he spoke, in verse 9, at Luke 14 and 9, and he spoke this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Luke does an amazing job here looking at these, and Luke does a great job of looking at these people and how he looks at this and what he's saying and what's done in Luke. Moving over to Luke chapter 18, we'd switched and I said 14, and going over to that second reading, when we looked at the second reading, when he tells the story of the Pharisee and the publican which are praying, and I want to look at that briefly here. And so here we are. Let's switch over into Luke chapter 18 and verse 9. And Luke does an amazing job of really just getting to the heart of the matter on how he's writing these. And he really puts us in this place and paints the picture as he did in chapter 14. Here we are in chapter 18 and 9. And he spoke this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Now, although Jesus doesn't mention them by name, the certain ones to whom Jesus spoke this parable were probably the scribes and Pharisees, yet again talking to this same group of people. We're not that far along from where we were a few chapters ago, and so we're very similar people that he's talking in, and we see that he's talking to these people who would really just kind of, you had this circular group of people that said, "Oh yeah, you're great, you're righteous, you're good, God loves you, you're doing the right thing, you're honoring God," and there was no real uplifting. It was just, as I said before, I'm patting myself, and then if I'm good, you're good. If you're good, I'm good. We're all good. You're good, I'm good. You're all good. Just standing there, just pointing at each other. They would come up with high-blown designations for themselves, and they would create these awesome titles for themselves. And one called this group of Pharisees, and one called themselves the light of Israel. One called themselves the uprooter of mountains, and the other called itself the glory of the law. But here we are, we find themselves to common people as empty cisterns. So they had this fraternity of people that we're right, we're good, we're doing all these things perfect, and here's my title, and I'm so good, I have this special title, and I serve God so hard and so much better than everybody else. I have a special title. I serve God so good. And so Jesus is talking to this group of people, and he's looking at them, and he tells this parable of two men that go up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a publican. Now, the Pharisees are a respected member of this most honored social group. So Jesus really juxtaposed. He says in his parable, he says, okay, on one hand we got a Pharisee. Yay, Pharisee. And on the other hand, we got a tax collector. Boo, tax collectors. So he goes from one to the other on both ends here, and he brings both of these people to the temple. And he brings them both to the temple and says, let's look at the Pharisee pray. So here he is. So we're going to the temple. The most devout observe 3 prayer times daily at 9, 12, and 3. They would go to the temple to pray, but you could go at other times and pray as well. But both of them go up to the temple to pray, and it tells us that among those who went to the worship, there was these extremes. So Jesus points out the extremes of worship, the hypocritical and the sincere. The proud Pharisee who did not think of himself above prayer, and the humble tax collector could not think of himself shut out from the benefit of prayer. And so we see one man, the Pharisee, stood and prays with himself. I love that. He prays thus with himself. Jesus is saying that he's just talking to himself over there, and the Pharisee's just talking to himself because God's really not listening to the Pharisee. So just in case you missed that, Jesus says that dude over there is just talking to himself because he's not in the right attitude for God to even listen or pay attention to what he's got going on. So the Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee, and I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even as this publican. And he points to the other end of the altar. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess. So the Pharisee's there reading, instead of reminding himself of how good God is, this man was reminding God of how good he was. Here's all that I do, God. Here's, again, I'm coming to the throne not of grace, but I'm coming to the throne of my good works, and you're sitting on a throne of all the good things that I've done, and that's the only reason you're God's, because of all the good stuff that I've done. So Jesus says, God's not even listening to that guy. He's over there talking to himself. So this Pharisee, the custom of the day, he's standing while praying. He's standing apart from the common folks, and he's over in the holy corner, and he's probably in this prominent place, and he's praying with himself, and it's this monologue that's no real conversation with God, and he thanks God of all the good things that I've done, that I'm so much better than everybody else. He makes no request of God. He doesn't need God's help, and he doesn't need God's justification. I've done it all by myself. So he brought upon himself his own self-approval. And if we're not careful, we take a census, we number our own virtues, our accomplishment, our resources, and thus we draw ourselves away from God. But what ground can there be for our counting or for our pride if we've not received God? I thought of this and jotted it down as I was studying. People say when they don't want to go to church with hypocrites, we can always answer Jesus did. Because Jesus is in church with this Pharisee hypocrite. So don't use that as an excuse not to come to church. There's been hypocrites in church as long as there's been church. There's also a lot of good people in church as long as there's been church too. So here we are. But then we find ourselves very quickly. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum ourselves. And there's this publican who stands afar off. He's not even going to lift his eyes up to heaven, but he smites upon his breast saying, God be merciful to me, a sinner. He stands in some obscure corner. He dares not even look up. And if you'll read Psalms chapter 40, which I don't have time to do, in verse 12, and Ezra chapter 9 and 6, he could not even do prayer upon his breast. He beats upon his breast and says, I can't even look up. I can't even find myself in a place that I can look forward, because I'm not even worthy to even look in where God even is. I'm not even worthy to put myself in that place, I can't even look up. I'm not able to look up. And you can count the hairs in my head, and you're so much better than I am. The Pharisee puts himself on one side, and we find our publican in a place. And then I tell you in verse 14, I tell you, this man went down to the house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. The Pharisee returned home with the same thing. He went to the temple, his own self-works, his own self-importance. The Pharisee brings that to the temple, and he takes all that home with him. But the tax collector got God's attention. For the very Son of God says, that man was justified in how he prayed. Oh, to have God's approval on our prayers and on our life. Oh, to have God look at our life and say, I approve of what you're doing. If we compare anything that we've done with what He's done, we put ourselves truly in perspective of where God is. We put ourselves in a place of the tax collector and realize that I've done nothing. I can look around and say that I've tried really hard. I can look around and say I've worked hard at it. I can look around and say I'm doing my best. I can look around and say all this that I can do. But when I compare it to God, when I compare myself in the place of where God is, I realize that I am nothing. I realize that there's not a thing that I can do to accomplishment. There's not a thing that I can do that does anything for me or for God, if I would say it that way. We say that I do these things for God, and certainly that's my hope. But God doesn't need me near as much as I need Him. God chooses to use me. God chooses to let me walk in His path. God chooses to let me to be a child of God. God chooses to allow me to be a servant of God. God chooses to use my pitiful efforts for His glory. God chooses to do all that. I don't have a choice in the matter. My choice is I must have Him. I can't go to heaven without Him. God's going to have heaven whether I'm there or not. God's going to have all that whether I make it or not. But I can't make it without Him. There's not a thing that I can do. I can't do enough good works. I can't say enough prayers in a certain way. I can't live a life, and I can't pay enough penance. I can't do anything to earn my way to heaven. That I must have Him. In both stories, it suggested that to make humility the equivalent of extreme self-depreciation. It's none of that. It isn't not false humility. But we need honesty with ourselves, that I come empty-handed to a throne of grace, and that we must have Him. And good to be here this morning. Okay, I'm going to change hats. All right. Good to be here. Amen. Glad to see everyone here. Amen. Glad to have the classes. And the first class has 3 people in it, from what I can count, because I didn't go back and count.